Today's video game industry presents a mature phenomenon and a good development trend. Video games are not just a product, but more importantly, they belong to a culture. The main reason video games have become a culture is the appeal and impact they bring. Great video games has quality content elements. For example, real pictures and sounds can give players a more realistic sense of substitution. In short, a good video game can enhance interaction with the player, thereby affecting the player's sense and emotions, increase the sense of immersion. In this video essay, I'll explain how video games can affect players' emotional sense in three ways. First, how the human sense interacts to enhance the experience. I will focus on sight and hearing. Second, the specific effects of graphics and sound effects in video games on player emotions. Finally, how they enhance the player's sense of substitution in video games through reality. And I also give some cases to enhance the convincing. How the human senses interact to enhance the experience. Vision and hearing, as one of the most important senses in the human body, play an important role in human emotion. The first is vision, which is the sense that has the most direct connection with image. The human body collects environmental data through vision to generate image cognition, such as spatial information such as the size and color distance of the pictures. Among them, information such as color can indirectly affect human emotion through vision, because different colors correspond to different emotions, which were discussed in the second part. The second is hearing, which is directly related to sounds. Hearing and sight are very similar and also has the ability to process information to the brain. The difference is that visual information has a specific shape, while hearing is a vague concept. When hearing and sight are combined, the two have an interactive and complementary effect. Complementary interactions occur when one party contains important information that is not present in the other, resulting in a composition of a complete experience. Scientists' research shows that people use their vision even when they are in the dark, but in such a case, vision cannot obtain information, so hearing acts as a complementary role in such case, imagining space in the dark by preventing the sounds of the environment. Just like blind people, the behavior of the sensory interaction is determined by many factors, including time and space. The specific effects of graphics and sound effects in the video games on player emotions. When video games companies usually make games in order to consider the player's immersive experience, what specific where they choose to display the picture in. As the most intuitive image channel of video games, the game perspective will directly the players play with what kind of emotions. Different types of video games provide completely different levels of immersion. Immersion is an important part of players' experience, provided that the players are willing to do so. Typical examples are FPS and massive multiplayer online RPG games, where the first-person and third-person perspectives and usually retrospectively. The first-person game has a strong sense of substitution and is more in line with the perspective of personal real life, which is generally for authenticity. In addition to this, the game company often render scenes with very realistic texture and model. In contrast, massive multiplayer online RPGs games are played from a third-person perspective. Such games usually use standards as camera. Although there's no strong sense of personal substitution in the first person, the lens is wider so as to better show the world view and the personality of the characters. Usually, RPG games use the perspective in order to reflect the interaction between the characters and the environment. To discuss about sense, lighting has always been one of the most important factors in the atmosphere of the sense. The intensity and design of the lighting can effectively bring the player's emotions, especially in horror games. Lighting plays a key role. Generally, horror games usually use a darker or even black scent to set off an unknown atmosphere. The level designer will add small sounds such as water droplets to express the quietness of the atmosphere, and then suddenly add harsh sound effects in some scary place to achieve scary purpose. At this time, the player can hardly see anything and can only imagine it through sounds. How to enhance the player's sense of substitution in video games through reality? In addition to the immersion brought by graphics and sound effects, video games enhance the player experience by interacting with real life. In recent years, the birth of VR games gears has made VR games one of the mainstream of video games, which we will discuss later. Before that, we need to talk about the video game interaction with external device before VR. Long before the PC became popular, players played through various peripherals because of the technical problems at that time. Most players played through the simple buttons of the controller until the popularity of the PC game. Players began to use the keyboard to play, but the obvious flaw is that the keyboard is not as free to control as handle. However, the advantage is that the complex key position of the keyboards allow each key position to have different command in the video game. Therefore, many complex operations in PC game can be implemented on the keyboard, which also makes many players have strong emotional substitution when switching key constantly. The images of somatosensory game has changed this pattern. The most typical example is Nintendo's Wii U, which does not have any controls but is replaced by a brief remote. Players can use this remote control to simulate hand movements in the game, especially in small simulation games. Players can get positive feedback both physically and mentally. Until now, Nintendo is still developing somatosensory games and has designed peripherals such as fitness rings in the sports games so that you can train your body and mind even at home. In fact, during this period, devices similar to somatosensory games had already existed. The equipment of some arcade games hall, especially racing games, is usually designed as the image of interior of a vehicle, which is also designed to increase the player's sense of substitution. The more realistic of controller, the more realistic of the emotion it can give to the player. This type of feedback is mapping. The closer of peripheral mapped from video games are to reality, the higher the degree mapping and the stronger experience through feedback. Go back to the VR devices. The reason why the virtual reality device is very successful is that it breaks through the space technically, and more importantly, it is more immersive. I also mentioned before that a few video games has a strong sense of immersion and has a great emotional impact on the player. A large part of the reason is that operation of characters in a video game usually only need to be easily realized through key commands, while VR requires player to actually make such action in real life, so it can get greater feedback and emotional change. In other words, VR games are more interactive. To sum up, the impact of video games on human emotion consists of external and internal factors. A great image can bring the picture closer to the sense the game is trying to describe, including the rendering of the texture and the lighting. The immersive sound effects allow players to imagine the sense even without image, and the interaction between the two can effectively show the atmosphere of the sense. The second is the interaction of the human's bodies on vision and hearing. The complementarity of vision and hearing through the brain, plus variety peripheral design of the real sense of substitution with the development of video games. The space and dimension of the game experience and are also changing, bring more immersive experience and more realistic emotion.